from donors on this, particularly for referencing the standards to be sure that they understand the requirements and cost implications at each stage. So I can see the recording has started. That's fantastic. As everyone knows, when we do this to consent, that we have recorded the session. So we're going to move on to the next slide.
Okay, just give me a second. There we go. Yeah.
So what is the construction good practice standard? It is a standard for for understanding what is better construction. So it looks at improving better planning, better designs, better management, better environmental practices, and also project results. So although the guidance, the construction standards provide guidance note, it is not a guide for how to do construction. It does not replicate the responsibilities of, an architectural or an engineering or a project management degree. But it is a way of putting a certain level of information so that everyone is starting at the same baseline.
And if I could just jump in on that, this is also part of what's referenced in the construction good practice standards, is that for specialist items, you need specialists to do the work. So instead of, hoping for the best, or not hiring engineers or not having the work double checked, you're kind of just hoping that it's going to be okay. The standard says, okay, no, here's what needs to happen. You need to have a specialist for this. This is who needs to sign off on it. This is, so it's also an organized way to move forward with your project and know that you're not missing steps. And I definitely want to double down on it's not a how-to guide for construction. There are guidance notes, but if you've never done a construction project before and you pick this up, maybe this isn't the time you should be doing a construction project. This is, because this is not a how-to guide.
Exactly. Thank you, Shane. So what are the goals of the construction standards? The main operational goal is that donors, implementing actors, and organizations understand the requirements in construction projects in humanitarian contexts. And we have to ask ourselves the question, why do we need these standards? And for everyone, we know that a common set of standards sets a minimum baseline for operations and how we can have level expectations for response. And that the complicated activities of construction require that we should have a minimum set of standards at every stage in the project cycle, because it is a highly risky activity, prone to not only life safety risks, but also fraud and delay cost implications. So looking at the stages of planning, design, construction, and handover, obviously very important, which correctly sets appropriate expectations for both the donor, the beneficiaries, local governments, and implementation organizations. And what we do know, and it's not really a surprise to anyone, of course, this is why we are constantly striving to improve, is that the humanitarian sector does have a poor record for construction quality, and the standards are an effort to try and improve that across the board. Shane, did you have anything to add?
100% behind that. I've seen firsthand very poor work, happening. And this was my motivation to get involved in this, is that, right after the Haiti earthquake, I see construction that looks exactly like what was there before, which is exactly why there was such a huge problem. So for me, on a personal level, the reason for doing this is because I've seen firsthand that, we built back exactly the same. We did not build back better. And so this is kind of, a way where we can build back better, and it's demonstrable. Like we can, we've followed certain steps, and we've got the proper design and the proper expertise to back up what we've done.
Super.
Next slide. Yeah, there we go.
So I'm going to hand over to Chiara now. Chiara, are you able to speak?
I'm here.
Yeah, did you want to present this one?
Sure. Well, let me see if you can. I mean, which slides are you?
Oh, see, you're having trouble seeing the presentation?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, how about I'll introduce it, and then you can just add to what we're saying. So the slide we're on now is the one talking about the different when we use the CGPS. So basically, it's used at every stage of the project, from planning, design, construction to handover. And then we wanted to make some differentiation because we had people coming to us and saying, okay, well, what if we're building, temporary shelter immediately after a disaster? Well, that isn't something that would typically be designed or typically be expected to last for any length of time. So basically a full temporary project, something that's got a shelf life of 6 months or shorter, is basically not covered by this, because you typically wouldn't design, a tarp with some bamboo in it. And then it also excludes projects where the design and everything is basically not controlled by the implementing organization. Maybe you can't access an area. Maybe the people don't, only want materials and they're going to deal with themselves. So there's specific cases where, this is not used and not necessary, I guess you could say. Do you want to add to that, Kiara? Is there anything that we missed on that? Okay, well, one thing I missed actually is, and this is the key thing, the main thing with the CGPS is that projects where human life is at risk, this is where the CGPS comes in. So I've seen a lot of projects, for example, there was a hospital being built in Haiti, and they were kind of just doing kind of whatever. And, and I asked them, I said, okay, well, why is it being done like this? And like, well, this is what they had done before, it's good enough. And my answer was, just because it wasn't right before, A, doesn't mean we should build it back right again. And B, the hospital collapsed and killed people, you are essentially going to kill people again if we have a similar earthquake. And so to me, this is exactly where the CGBS comes into place, when human life is at risk. Okay, so.
I just wanted to add something. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Sure thing.
Because I don't know, I have a problem with the line anytime.
We can hear you, yeah.
No, she's having problems with Teams.
Oh, okay, yeah, this happens.
Kiara, maybe just put it in the chat box. I think that's definitely coming through.
I'm back.
Yes.
I don't know what's going on. So sorry. Yeah, I just wanted to add something on 3 slides prior to the current one. And then when Elise was telling about, that's very important. I wanted to add about the standards. It's, respecting what we've been trying to do in the past, throughout the past, I would say like 3 years, has been like a kind of like, it's a huge effort that has been done through, a lot of consultation with the other colleagues around the globe, and talking, and also colleagues from other contexts. So adaptable, I would say, also the word of this document, that includes not only planning, but also try to understand the different environmental contexts. Like also Shane was saying about Haiti, it's very important what it's meant to be. Also, the document helps also to ensure the quality in construction, not obviously to be a guideline, because it's very difficult to have the document being used like a guideline and adaptable to each context, but it's also providing the specific quality, good construction practices in a different context. So it's very ambitious, but it's been done through very intense work, consultation with colleagues working in different responses. And I wanted to highlight that because it's been quite a job in the past years.
Definitely. Now, I believe I was going to be doing the updates. I've got my camera here, so we're going to flip my camera on just so we have some. I don't know if this is going to actually work or not. Okay, so basically with the highlights that we have for 2020, we've got some fantastic feedback in the past, and that's really kind of like fed into the latest revision. The latest revision we're hoping to release in the next month or so based on some further refinement. So one key thing we added was key actions for each standard. So basically what it's going to look like, and what you need to do. So it might say, for example, you have engineering double check, for your design. And then the key action is, double check is performed and signed off by the project engineer and the, third party engineer. So that this is what you need, this is the standard, and this is what needs to be done. So for each one, there's a standard and an action that needs to happen with it. We also changed a few things. For example, we got some feedback about design and supervision costs. Initially, we had a minimum of 5%, and the discussion was basically that it's never going to be 5%. 5% would be in a very organized environment where, things are, very clear cut and clean. And generally, if it's a humanitarian project, we're not dealing in that kind of situation. So we revised the minimum design and supervision costs at 10% of the project cost. Stronger focus on environmental issues. In each section, we've added environmental issues, environmental guidance, and standards. This is not a year where we can ignore environment, and in the future, obviously, it's going to become even more important. And so each in the planning stage is environmental, in the design stage is environmental, basic standards that need to be met to try to maximize the project and minimize the impact on the environment. Also, we did some changing with the way we talked about the construction work plan. So basically separating the construction work plan from the overall project work plan, which could be very different. And then basically, ensuring that there's coordination between the two, and also increased engagement with communities, highlighting that as that's a huge part of the project because this is who we're doing the project for. Okay, so next, let's get this. Okay, so recap and recent achievements. So basically, this was initiated in 2016. Initially, it was a Save the Children document, and it still is. There is a form of this internally with Save the Children, and so we took this and revised it. And as Kara mentioned, we had the task of making this organization-wide, so it doesn't matter what organization you work for, as well as worldwide standard. So it's not a standard for Africa or for South America. It's a standard that can be used anywhere. So that was a challenge. Adaptable, exactly. Yeah. So Kara had a very important point talking about that because Save the Children can focus on their standards and their internal things, and so it can be very specific. However, if you've got a standard that can be used by anybody, it has to be quite different. So there was quite a difference in making it more adaptable, making it more useful for everybody. Some big things. Kara had some huge success with the East Africa Forum in 2019. Kara, if you want to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, also to add to the adaptable terminology, I would say also because we've been also thinking that with the type of crisis, with the type of emergencies we've been responding around the world. This document, it should not just be applied, like Liz said, or Shane, my colleagues, not just to shelter responses actually, but construction itself, not emergencies. So the type of emergencies are different. We're talking about conflicts, we're talking about, like Shane said, also in Haiti, we had the earthquake and we went back to the earthquake, we went back to the construction as before. I was in Haiti too. So it's the quality in construction and the typology of responses that we're talking about. And we also introduced the document in the regional the Africa Forum that we held in Nairobi in July. And held in Nairobi. It was online. It was online, and it was addressed to all the colleagues in Africa. And as you know, in Africa, we have different typology of responses as well. The continent is huge, and people from each corner of Africa, west, east, north, south, responded. South, including Liz from Cape Town. So with different typology of responses and different also attention and interaction from also donors interested in applying the document to the different areas in Africa. And I'm talking about also not only donors, but also private sectors. But I don't want to talk about that now. Maybe later when we give the update about clusters and donors. Shane, over to you.
Yeah, so donor engagement's been interesting. We've had some traction with the Canadian government. We've had some traction with the Americans, British. However, Americans and British with the mergers and this and that, we're not quite clear where we stand anymore. So we're looking at kind of moving forward with that and trying to engage that. We've also got the new 2020 edit coming out, which we feel has been a vast improvement on what we had before. Based on feedback that we've received. So we're quite anxious to get that out and to have the version 3 publicized. I'm going to pass the next point over to Liz with the disaster ready standards. This is another great development that we have that's really going to put the CGPS in the hands of other people. Liz, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Shane. So I'm not sure how many people are aware online that have joined this call, but Disaster Ready have given the platform of training to a much broader audience in that they have allowed for something called the mobile modules. And what this is aimed at is reaching the field teams who don't necessarily always have access to a laptop or good internet, so that they get bite-sized introductions to multiple topics. In fact, Shane, if you want to just quickly jump to the next slide, there's a screenshot of that. And an amazing opportunity for our field teams. You can pretty much do little bite-sized introductions to just about any subject matter. And it's been an amazing opportunity for the guys in the field who generally tend to work only in in mobile phone applications or very limited access to have opportunities to learn about these things. So we have in production a module for the mobile guide that will give a brief introduction to the construction standards to all field teams. And it's something that's been in production for a while and obviously delayed now because we had this revision and lessons learned that we wanted to put back into the document. So we're hoping to see this coming online Q1 2021, and we'll obviously be putting out an update on that through the cluster. Thanks, Shane. So you can go back to the previous slide. Shall I finish up on these two other points? You're muted.
Oh, sorry. I had my camera on. I don't think I was speaking. Yeah. So yeah, Liz, please carry on. Yeah, these points are definitely definitely good for you. Yeah.
Great. So just to follow on with other linked activities that have been going on, there's obviously so much about what we do in construction that is within every single one of the standards that is embedded with what could potentially be massive projects. Around the aspect of safety, health and safety on a construction site. And in particular, one of the things that has come up and has been, a very prevalent topic, and there is going to be a presentation on this later in the meeting, so I do recommend you all join, is the concept of fire safety within our camps, within our shelters, within our operating environments as humanitarians, and kind of what framework exists around that and what can be done to improve within our own operations. Another topic of improvement that we've looked at is the construction contract. What is actually being used out there by the humanitarian agencies? What are the inconsistencies that we're seeing and the challenges that staff in the field have, even understanding what those construction contract clauses are? How can we improve quality assurance in our construction programming if our staff don't understand how to implement those clauses on a construction site? So there's another fantastic project called the IHIP construction contract. It's actually being run at the moment with the initial project is actually being directed through the WASH cluster, but IHIP will also be giving a presentation to the shelter cluster. Please check the agenda for that one, because that is also going to be coming up with a brief introduction to what's already happened and how you can get involved to ensure that we have sufficient support and a greater product that can be used by the humanitarian actors globally. And what's also very interesting to see is that other agencies have started to use the construction standards. For one, I've been in contact with Concern, who are very interested in seeing how they can improve their programming around WASH activities, but WASH construction and infrastructure activities. So there's a lot of uptake where people are recognizing the value of these construction standards. And also NRC have endorsed a lot of the guidance from the construction standards within some of their own internal guidance, particularly a recent guidance note that came out around schools. So we can go to the next slide, Shane, which was the one on disaster ready. And then I think we can jump straight ahead to Save the Children. That's it. Great. So I can see there are some questions in the chat box. Thank you very much. I can see Taufik has sent one. I'm making a note of your questions and we'll address these at the end of the presentation. So learning from Save the Children. For anyone who doesn't know me, my name is Liz Palmer and I work for Save the Children as the Global Construction Lead. This project was initiated as an internal document with Save the Children. In fact, we're very lucky to have one of the original authors of the guidance, Michelle Young, is online today. But just to say that this was a set of standards where we recognize that within our own organization, we needed to become more professional and also more strategic about the way that we manage construction activities, given the high rate of risk that we're seeing in our programs. Save the Children constructs in around 50 countries around the world with a very, very large and diverse portfolio. And we found that country office staff are not always supported to understand the technical risks associated with construction activities. So with regards to Save the Children, we've been operationalizing these standards within our organization for a number of years. And we've had a lot of tools that have been developed that have supported us in tracking country office progress and change and improvements. And there's been a phenomenal uptake within the organization as a whole, which has been really great to see. And so important for us that we're able to show how these lessons have been taken up, not only within our own organization, but how it's actually been adopted and endorsed within governments and also within interagency processes at a coordination level within UNHCR refugee crises, but also how it has supported clusters. So what we have there, the BM stands for benchmark assessment. This is a set of the magic 26 questions that are based on our standards just to track country office compliance and readiness. And through that assessment, we can then identify what are the greatest gaps and put together an implementation plan. So we have a template for that within Save the Children that I can share using our standards with anyone who's interested to see how that looks. And there is another slide to show you how we graphically identify that. We've also developed what we call a portfolio tracker tool. This is in essence, both of these things are just very simple Excel spreadsheets. The aim with this is that anyone with a basic knowledge of computers would be able to access and use this tool. But for each country office, what we found is that many times construction activities are done under different thematic areas. So the overall vision or visibility of your portfolio and your risk is actually hidden under a number of different projects. And so the idea behind the portfolio tracker tool is that a country office actually is tracking those construction activities, no matter where they are. If they're in Gambela, Asasa, down in Dolo, you have an idea of how big is your risk associated with construction. And linked to that is a risk review checklist for proposals, whereby proposal development teams who are non-technical specialists are given a list of questions where they are, do you have a specialist budgeted to support you? Do you even know what the design is? Are you aware of what the government regulations and standards for construction are? And if you don't know the answers to those questions, you need to seek technical advice. So in some countries, we obviously have the capacity. We have a very developed programming team who are set up and they are linked and communicating with our construction managers. And then, of course, with the smaller countries, they're less supported. And that's where we have to make sure that communication is already in play. One of the other things that we've developed, and we've had some very, very good feedback from the field on this, is that we bring in some of the best templates that have been developed by our country officers, and we share that with teams who don't necessarily have the support and the capacity to do so. For example, a quantity surveying template that was developed specifically for automatic quantifying of bill of quantities. We have a great one from Zimbabwe, which was based on obviously market rates, etc. And another great one from Nepal, which also includes a fantastic amount of engagement with communities. So the template actually allows for including the community engagement within that process. And as I mentioned about community engagement, we also have a template memorandum of understanding with communities because, it's obviously very well evidenced is how the sustainability and resilience of communities and also our projects is increased the more we are able to ensure community-based programming. And then one of the things which is the holy grail is to have a standard operating procedure for construction within the country office. So sorry for all of these acronyms. That's very naughty of me, especially for the non-English speakers. Standard operating procedure for construction, so that country offices understand in the same way that they would how they should be undertaking gender programming, etc., is that there is an understanding also how do we endorse and embed these standards, our construction standards, within a country office so that the program teams understand, the finance teams. I see we have online somebody from HR, very, very important. How do we know that we've got the adequate amount of staffing and the right number of people supporting our programs? So these are all the things that Save the Children has managed to operationalize. And it's been a phenomenal journey for us, something that we really learned from. We've adapted certainly our own internal standards. This has also led to some of the adaptations that we're putting into the global standards. So if you can go on to the next slide, please, Shane. I'll just show you quickly some visual representation of what the benchmark assessment looks like, which is the first tool that we had. So as I say, it's a very, very simple tracking tool. In fact, I'm showing you a section here called strategic planning. This is a section that did not translate into the interagency standards. It was an internal one. The idea behind it is that country officers at their strategic planning stages should understand and recognize the gaps within their programming. So a good example here is the portfolio tracker, which I mentioned before. And so we identified, does the country office have a systematic tracking procedure for the management of projects that is hosted at head office level? And so you can then rate yourself on a 0 to 3 scoring. There is no project tracking. Some projects are tracked, all projects are tracked, but the information is inconsistent, or the holy grail, to have this portfolio tracker that is constantly in use and that anybody, finance teams, can see what's missing, etc. And on the basis of this benchmark assessment, the country office gets obviously their scoring sheet, and we can begin to understand on a benchmark level what are the gaps that a country office has, and also what support do they need, because this is really, really important from my point of view as the global lead, is recognizing the capacity gaps where we can make sure that country offices are supported. Next slide, please. And then once we've done this benchmarking assessment, you get a very quick snapshot spider diagram. Also, with thanks to Excel, it's a very simple tool, but what this allows us to see is on the basis of all of those benchmarks, where we have our gaps and where we have our strengths and what is going to be the action point. So the diagram 2016 on the left, you can see a lot of the scores are very low, which means they're on the center of the circle. And what we can see from that is maintenance planning is an issue. This whole section around B for staffing, proposal review, etc., very, very weak. We know that, in fact, our procurement processes in Save the Children are excellent, very, very strong. So we're getting a score of 3 out of, can you not see, Philippe? We're getting a score 3 out of 3 for that one. And then obviously some improvements are needed around health and safety meetings, etc. So we put together an improvement plan for the country office that by 2018, we had almost achieved a full scoring rating for the country office on just about every single point. Maintenance planning consistently low scoring, but I think even now in 2020, we're beginning to see huge improvements in that department. So Ethiopia is one of our longest running country offices, and one of the lessons we have learned about this is that these changes are incremental and they do take time, which is why having a focal point at country office level is really, really important to ensure change is embedded in processes. Next slide, please. Another great opportunity for us within our planning is to make sure that, and this comes from Nepal, as I that the country office really embraces the community-based approaches, and that is actually included in the programming. So what I love about this schedule, the work plan schedule for this project, was not only do they talk about site assessment and feasibility study, but there is a meeting with the community put into the work plan. That when you have a meeting to agreement with the user committee, that's line number 3 there, that is put into the work plan. Orientation with the user committee is in the work plan. So that the link with program quality and community-based programming and the engagement with those teams, the orientation of Masons, that is in the work plan. It's not just about the structural bricks and mortar. It is about the community. It is about making sure that everyone is up to date and included in the process, right down to the post-construction public audit, joint monitoring with government officials, and then handover of the building to the school management. And for me, I think really, really amazing work has come out of these community-based approaches, where we see the confidence of the communities in those buildings. When there is a shock, they are empowered to understand what is wrong with the building. Is this something they can fix? Who can they go to support them? So this has really been an incredible process. It's very much linked to the Global Alliance for Disaster Risk Reduction and Resilience in Schools processes, GADRIS, towards safer schools construction, and it's something that we have seen incredible progress in our work in Save the Children. So this is something that, just to flag how that level of quality can actually be embedded into your programming tools. Next slide, please. Also, as I mentioned, we have the portfolio tracker. So this is what a portfolio tracker can actually give you as a programmer. If you're the program manager, if you're the finance team, if you are needing to speak to your awards team with your communication with donors, and like we say, we have a number of donors online here, this is the kind of visibility that you can achieve if you have the right program management tools. So with our program trackers, what we have is a number of different graphs that is obviously the work in a country office. It actually says Uganda, but in fact, what I did was I put some bogus information in so that it was clearer just for everyone to see. But what you can see is the status of the projects. I think, Philippe, you might be on a delay. And what I would recommend is that you leave the meeting and rejoin. This sometimes happens with team. So what you can see with the slide on the right-hand side is the progress tracking is then visibility. So you can see now projects that are terminated, projects that are on hold, number of projects that are not yet started, and it begins to identify for you, number one, where is obviously your biggest workload, where are your challenges, and then also you can overlay this with a staffing tracker. Do you have sufficient level of supervision to support the quality assurance processes? At the same time, from a financial tracking point of view, the finance teams always pull their hair out at the end of every financial year when they have to obviously accrue amounts of funding within the finance systems, particularly when we have these invisible amounts of the retention, which is something that obviously people, who are non-technical do struggle with the concept of retention, particularly for large projects. And for donors as well, understanding, of course, that money then is going to be in a holding pattern for a number of months until the defects liability period is over. So that's the kind of information that the portfolio tracker has enabled us to develop. This is shared with our country offices on a monthly basis, and anybody who wants to know about their award and the processes and the challenges that are happening, they can immediately request an updated status from the construction manager, and this information is then visible for them. It's also very nice for obviously the donors to see what the project status is, and a very, very quick risk assessment tool. For the moment we have any challenges or delays, it's immediately visible on the project tracker. Portfolio tracker. Next slide, please. So the challenges that we've had, and I think everyone will relate to these challenges. So within Save the Children, one of the biggest issues we have, unfortunately, is that construction staff are not generally supported in strategic roles at regional office and country office. And this is based on the obvious, which is that in many cases we only do small amounts of construction work, and that maintaining a full-time staff member is a challenge. So one of the solutions to this is that we establish a focal point within the country office. So this focal point may be your procurement manager who has visibility on the procurement requests. It may also be your ops director or someone within the ops team who's able to recognize and understand what the construction activities are within the whole country, and just make sure that they are in touch with the different field office teams to pull in the key information from the supervisors on the site. This is also then fed into our risk review process, so that when we have our monthly risk meetings, any challenges that are being experienced at the construction programs can be addressed, and any additional support that's needed is then escalated to me. Another thing that's been incredibly successful, which is not actually listed here, is that we have in some countries a 50% or even 25% level of effort staff member joining us from a private sector consultancy. And this has proved to be exceptionally successful in some country offices, where you have a professional staff member who is dedicated to supporting the country office and ensuring that they have the technical support, the training that is needed, and also particularly at points of approval, as well as points of payment verification. So any of the inspections of invoicing, etc., are then supported by somebody who can be assuring of both the quality of the processes and also making sure that there's no fraud. And then one of the things that we have, in a way, one has to see the opportunities with COVID. While devastating as a pandemic is, it's given us all a very level playing field in terms of our access to information. So today we have online people who would not ordinarily have been able to join the Global Shelter Cluster presentation. We have from Ethiopia, we have from Darfur, etc. And in the same way with COVID, it has actually created a level playing field where we've been able to access a lot more of our remote field teams, and we've put in place a lot of remote training and engagement with those guys, and it has meant that we have greater engagement with them and we're able to triage their challenges directly. So that's my presentation from Save the Children. I hope it's been useful. Certainly from our side, it's been a long journey, but one that has been incredibly rewarding, particularly for our field engineers who really, really appreciate the support that they're getting. And we're seeing such incredible uptake in terms of the progress that has been made, both to their own capacity, their engagement with the work, and also to the quality of the work that's being developed. So I'll hand over, I think, to Shane. Is it you now?
Yeah. So yeah, I believe I was
Oh,
one to
Chiara,
address this one.
Yeah.
Or was it Chiara?
Just briefly, thanks
Sure
a
thing.
lot, Elise, for the presentation and for the comprehensive presentation. Thanks to Save the Children, we were able to roll out and develop in depth this document. I want to link up the challenges that you were just mentioning, the challenges that Save the Children have had in the past and is having. We also do have challenges at global level with to roll out the standards, and mainly what we've been trying to do the past years, and the colleagues been member of the working group for a while, they know that we've been struggling to engage. I would not say engage, because we've been in touch, as Liz mentioned, with the WASH cluster, presenting at other cluster level, to make the document cross-cutting and not just narrowed to shelters. Absolutely not. But as we said several times, this is a document that should be used for any typology of construction. And I don't want to open the discussion of shelter. Shelter is a process and not as a product. But yeah, this is one of the main challenges we had, is to be able to engage properly with other clusters. And so WASH, education and health cluster, we reached out at them, but we were not able to, engage and keep them in somehow, like, attract them to the discussion that we are having on related to the standards. Donors, as Elise said, we have several colleagues from donors present to this call and this working group today. Not that they are not engaging, but maybe more careful, or I don't know if I'm using the right word, suspicious, or in adding the documentation, or maybe like in seeing this document like an additional policy, an additional standard to add to the actual current one. And also the third big challenge that we have is a lack of understanding of the deficiencies that we could have in constructions in any emergency. Again, it's not just emergencies, but in humanitarian world, in humanitarian responses, and what is needed to address them. So basically, training our colleagues in the field. So these are the three challenges we also wanted to discuss with you and open the table to the colleagues in this call, and outside as well. We can continue our bilateral talk and how to. And also, if I may continue, Shane, discuss about what's next, and you can also pick it up from here. But
Could I add one point to what you said? And then, so just with the lack of understanding of the deficiencies, our left in the comment box is talking about how, well, they don't have the proper staff. And not only do organizations not have the proper staff, they also don't understand because they're not specialist enough to know how bad of a job they're really doing. It's a square box, it's a hospital. That's a square box, it's a square box, same, not at all. And so, and the point with in our left's point is that, this should all just be private sector, forget it. Now, I've personally, I'm a structural engineer. I've run projects where it has been done properly and done effectively, and it is possible, within the humanitarian organization. And this is what this document is pushing. So this document is not saying, oh, it should be, anybody should do construction. It's not saying that only private sector should do construction. But if you are going to do it, here's how to do it right. And so I think the humanitarian organizations can do it correctly and can do it right. However, it is not currently the case. Anyway, but and this is, and I think people don't realize, donors, implementers across the board don't realize how bad of a job they're doing in some cases, and so don't understand, well, why would I need to do anything different? Sorry, carry on, Kara. Okay, I think we might have.
Sorry, I was talking with my microphone mute, but please go ahead. And you, I was talking to myself. Please go ahead with the next.
Okay, so what's next for this? Actually, let me just flip my video on here so we have. So and I'll go back. 2 seconds, just so you can actually see. Okay, so we're looking to finalize the update standards. We're looking for peer review volunteers. That's actually a bit outdated. We probably have enough right now, but if you're really interested, definitely let us know. Especially if you've got, you're an engineer or you're an architect or you're, someone who's a specialist, technical specialist, that could actually help. As we discussed, we're going to be launching the training on the disaster ready modules that should be coming out shortly. And we're the requested donors for engagement and how to embed the standards. So basically, we want to engage donors and find out, okay, well, how best can this be implemented in what you did? When I was talking to Canadians, the best they could come up with was referencing our standards, and then they added in pieces that we had into their own internal guidance. So they couldn't directly say, okay, you need to do this, because their internal guidance was, quite developed and quite, interconnected with other things. So they couldn't just pull it apart and say, okay, we'll use this. So, but again, for us, it doesn't matter if it's referenced and you're doing it correctly. Great. That's what we're looking for. So we're looking to donors to find out how we can best connect with you. Partners, how are you using this? How can you use this? Are you going to use this? So implementing people, we want to talk to you as well. We want to find out, well, what's stopping you from using this, and what's, how can this be best put in with you? And then we're also looking at developing different trainings on the different parts of the standard. Right now, the disaster ready module is kind of an overview. So looking at, very specific, parts of it. They've got one there, hazard mapping, for example. And the other thing is, maybe right now you're not involved in construction work. However, someone in your organization may be. So promotion of the CGPS with those people. Maybe people with other organizations that are doing construction work. Maybe bring them and say, look, here's this great document. This could help you do an excellent project, and promoting it. So it's not just us talking about it. It's people in the field talking about it. It's people doing the work talking about it. So this is kind of what we're looking for right now for kind of our next steps. Let's see, I continue here. Okay, so we were going to do a Menti for the Q&A. I think we might have to just look at the chat box.
Yeah, Shane, I can. I think probably what's good is to address some of the questions, because they're very pertinent and yeah, from that point of view, we've got like 11 minutes, so let's see what happens. If it's all right, shall I take over the slide?
Sure thing.
Presentation.
I'll just give control over. Just 1 second. Sorry about that.
If it'll allow me to do this.
Yeah, give control.
So,
great. Sorry, it isn't quite happening. I don't know why.
That's all right.
Yeah. Okay, if you want to just direct me, I can't get the give control part to come back again. I don't know why.
I think I am presenting. Is that right, guys?
I'm not
Michelle,
sure.
Michelle, can you see my screen?
Oh, there we go. Yeah, I can see it.
Yes,
great.
I can.
Okay, so I can see, yes, I've put in the chat box a kind of a code for menti.com. So if you go to menti.com and use the code 1567790, which is also in at the top of the screen here, you can see it, you can join the conversation. So the question would be, are you aware of the standards? Have you or your organization used the standards? That's our first question for you guys today. Based on the conversation that's been going on in the chat box, and I'm really appreciating everyone's comments. Thank you so much. We'll just try and address those while you guys, there you go, not sure. Thank you very much. I appreciate the honesty. One of the questions we had, and I'm going to start with this one, which one to use? The global construction standards or the building code in the country in which we work? The standards directly reference the use of the building code. This is not prescriptively telling you what building regulations are, like in terms of width of doorways, height of handrails, etc. It directs people to using the building code. And the reason for this is most of the times people don't actually know that they need to follow a building code, or they don't know what the building code is, particularly when we go into an emergency situation where the applicability of that information is not available. Some countries have such appalling building codes that they actually reference, and I think we could probably say most of the world that we work in, we actually reference a better standard, which is either the British standards, the European and British standards. Many countries use the US standards. In some countries in Southeast Asia, they apply Australian standards. So the point is not to say we will prescribe which building code you will use. It is to prescribe the use of the most appropriate building code. So that is to understand that in many cases, governments themselves reference British standards. Kenya, for example, references British standards as the code. Yes, as a reference point. That's great. So I can start trying to. Thank you very much. So anyone, we can obviously support a little bit with how to implement this out. So the next question that we had was, do we have some recommended menu for owner-driven projects as well? And this again comes to another question, which is what specific modalities of implementation are covered in the standards? Contractor-led, construction labor, or owner-driven? Each of this modality has a different overhead cost. Very, very good point. And if you go into the standards, there is a specific standard which looks at the percentage, the average percentage kind of baseline amount that we would look at applying in terms of technical expertise and support that should be given to a project. And this does reference what is the modality. So we talk specifically about the amount of extra staffing and support that is required for each of these projects. And you
just
also
to add
have to
into
look.
that, just to add into that, we're also talking design and supervision. We're not talking about overhead for an organization. So for their accounting staff and for cars and things like that. So I just want to make sure there's no confusion. We're not trying to just prescribe, okay, your organization overhead cost must be this. This is the technical design and supervision costs that we're putting out here.
Exactly. And the guidance also looks at making sure that the considerations, exactly as Shane said, around access and the environment that you're working in. If it is a country office that has a repeat issue of quality issues, you obviously want to increase your support that's needed for the supervision and quality assurance processes. So the standards are not prescriptive around what modality you should be using, but rather allow you to have opportunities to assess the situation and ensure that you've planned appropriately. I see the next question is, this is not intended to be applicable for self-build. In fact, it is very much linked to community-based approaches, as we've mentioned, and you can see from the work that was done in Nepal, which was actually for an ECCD, but very applicable in terms of the programming, is to ensure that interaction, those community-based approaches, are built into the time plan. This is one of the greatest issues that we have in many cases with program managers, is they think, oh yes, we're going to build with communities, and then the construction manager must just turn up and apparently everyone knows how to build. So this is a very good question, how to address this and have a crossover with the self-build working group. these standards have been operational in the shelter cluster for a long time, and we would hope that the self-build group are using the standards for supporting, again, the processes within the self-recovery group. It's a conversation that we haven't directly had yet, but very happy to do so. Obviously, if there's anyone on the call who is engaged in that.
Just one point to add to this self-build. It is a little more difficult with self-build to enforce standards. But like Liz said, you can train them because not everybody knows how to build a house from the start. So if there's training, if there's designs, if there's, if you're helping people, so there's supervision, it may not be perfect because in the end, you may not be able to force someone to do what you want. There are ways to do it, obviously, and however, the design can be correct. The supervision can be there, the guidance can be there, the training can be there. So it may not follow every recommendation for the CPGS, letter for letter. However, it can follow a lot of them.
Exactly. So the next Menti was really to ask if anyone had any questions, and I can see we have a very, very active chat box. So I'll just go back to some of the other questions. We have 5 minutes left. Is incremental shelter considered in the standards? Absolutely. As you can see with the programming, the principle is how to project manage any construction activity. So that process of incremental planning should be part of your planning process. The standards do not address how you should do incremental shelter programming. What it does is address the project management standards that you should apply to any process. And I hope that's clear. I do recommend that you have a read through the standards and see if there's anything that you would like to see kind of strengthened. Bearing in mind, of course, is that for each specific context, for each specific project, there may be a separate guidance note that should be applied. And as you can see in the standards, we have links to a number of resources that are relevant to support specific processes. So this is not a prescriptive set of standards for one particular activity. It should be applicable on a global scale to any country office, to any context, and also to any construction activities. The next question was about the 6 months durability. So this was an original process that came about through the shelter cluster on the basis of the emergency stage. Something very interesting to note from my point of view in Save the Children is that we find that some of the highest risks around construction activities is in the short-term activities, emergency latrines, for example, that have a habit of collapsing, and making sure that in a context like Cox's Bazar, which is very, very high prevalence of disaster-prone activities, that those structures are built to purpose, because most likely they may be intended only for 6 months durability, but we know the average lifespan of a refugees camp is 17 years. So that, I think, guidance point is one up for debate, certainly not one that I would necessarily agree with within our own organizations. I say to people, those temporary latrines are the most dangerous, and they are the things that we should be looking at as a point of high risk. So that is a very important point. To
back Liz up on this, if you're building something and you're just saying it's got a 6 month lifespan, knowing full well that it doesn't, this is a responsibility of the organization to take responsibility and say, okay, we know these latrines are going to be here for the next 5 years at least. We need to build them that way. And so this is not a way to get out of following regulations by saying, oh, it's only 6 months, because as Liz said, that it's not going to be a 6 month thing that are going to be buried in. They're going to be used for a lot longer. So it really is up to the organization to kind of take charge of the situation and say, we need to do this right, because this is going to be a somewhat permanent setup.
Exactly. And then I can see Richard Luff and Michelle have had a very lively conversation, which is really, really super. So I hope that some of those points have been addressed. One of the primary conversations points that came up here is that the point of lack of construction staff at senior levels you are highlighting is a deeper issue, that nearly all not-for-profit actors, including UN, Red Cross and NGOs, are fundamentally not equipped to take on large construction projects, and so should not. Leave it to the private sector. I'm going to say that point is up for debate for a number of reasons. Number one is, as you've stated in the chat box, there is a massive, massive recognition and approval of the community-based approaches, particularly as has been evidenced in places like Nepal, where the community construction activities have been incredibly successful with the appropriate technical programming and support. In some cases, large construction projects that have been done by private sector have not necessarily been better than the ones that we've done ourselves. So we also have evidence to prove that if we have applied standards and technical support and quality assurance with an appropriate project management methodology, NGOs can implement just as successfully as the private sector. And in our work, as Michelle stated in the chat box, we have the benefit of engaging those communities. We have the benefit of improving their resilience and their ability to maintain and support future improvements to those construction projects. So I think that there's definitely a risk assessment that needs to be done at the outset of every single project. And based on what you know about that community, their ability to do the work, what the building industry is like, what is the size, the scale, the risk of the project, you should be making that decision about what support you need, what modality you will apply, and how much budgeting support do you need from that. And those are some of the questions that standards address to try and ensure that at every stage of the project, those questions are being asked and the appropriate planning has been put in place.
And to echo what Liz is saying, there's a fundamental shift that needs to happen in the humanitarian world when it comes to construction, and very much because at top levels there are not construction people. I being an engineer and working for working for NGOs, I've seen firsthand, you're trying to convince someone who is, several levels above you, something that's very obvious and clear from a construction point of view, but because they don't understand that, they disagree or you're overruled. And so a fundamental shift is definitely needed. And also, I think it's important to recognize is that NGOs and the UN have their strengths, and that tends to be the community angle and the embedment with the community. And the private sector has its strengths, the technical capacity, efficiency, speed, and a blend of those is definitely going to be the way of the future, rather than, okay, we must all go private sector, or we must, forget about the private sector, because there's benefits to both. But I totally agreed, though. There is a shift that needs to happen because those issues are definitely prevalent.
So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm afraid I have to leave the call because I have another presentation that I'm going to do. I'm very pleased to see from Simon Joe that he's saying he has used the standard successfully, and particularly on this point of spend. And just to go back to Sonia's comment, which I think is very important, is what should we be prioritizing? Well, that's where you come back to your assessment. What are the biggest risks that you're seeing in your country offices? And where do you feel you should be looking at your improvement plan and prioritizing immediate life-saving interventions? And this is something that I think for the donors as well, we have so much conditionality around some of the activities that we do, but are we really looking at how do we implement those construction projects? And I think I can say from USAID that they do have a very, very strong and supportive piece of information around community engagement, environmental monitoring, etc. But the actual construction processes, the amount of support that's budgeted for that technical supervision, all of these things can be strengthened. So I'm going to have to step off. Please continue having this conversation without me, and any questions that are directly to me, you can reference it in the chat box, and I'll see if I can pick it up.
Thanks so much, Liz.
Okay,
yeah, no problem. Thank you. Sonia, just to address that point a little bit more, a lot of times I found when organizations get to the point where, this is going to be good enough, it's usually a problem with planning. And so had the project been planned from the get-go properly, you wouldn't be at a stage at the 11th hour where you're having to say, okay, this is good enough. A hospital that collapses is fine for this country. When is a hospital that's going to collapse, under a windstorm? Okay, it really never is. So the good enough argument, I've seen that, I've heard that, but are there people that are worth good enough? So you're worth a hospital that's not worth collapsing in a hurricane. Country X people are not worthy of the same standard. And no, I don't mean to be too morbid about it as per se, but I find in general that if the projects were planned from the get-go and for example, design work and technical specialists were funded from the get-go, you're not put in that hard position where you need to be like, okay, do I go good enough, or do I drop the project, or what happens? So Yeah, it's a tough situation, but I think planning, and I think this is where the CGPS at the get-go at the planning stages is critical, because it talks about these things. Okay, so also in the chat box, okay, thanks, glad to hear the progress. Okay, a number of great construction folks to call. I'm sharing a link to initiative increasing resilience with no foundations. Okay, so there's a prize you can win. Okay, I not heard of Greg's group before, but yeah, awesome, sounds great. Okay, sorry for the basic question, but where can the updated standard be found? Okay, so right now, Simon Joe, the updated standard is only shared amongst a few people, because we're in the final stage of the revision. So we're hoping to get version 3 put out in the next couple weeks. So we're doing a kind of final peer review, and then we're putting it in publishable format, and then it's going to be sent out for everybody. So at the moment, it's the version 3 is not available. Version 2 is available on the Shelter website, if I remember correctly. I don't have the link handy, but on the Shelter website, if you search for the CGPS, you'll be able to find version 2. Okay, so anything else question wise here? If you're higher management level, okay. Any other questions? Feel free to speak, I guess, at this point. I think there's enough people where we can handle if people want to speak up and ask their question.
No, I think if I may add, Shane, and I didn't have a chance to thank also Liz, she left quickly for the next meeting. I also think it's very important to talk about the next steps, way forward. Obviously, it's been the three of us holding the fort, but we're welcome also to not to have a huge group, but more like a consistent group. And anyone wants to also reach out, we can share the email and the construction working group email, and we can extend and share whatever the document. I would say also that the version 2 that you mentioned, we're working finalizing the version 3, but happy to. I mean, we do not foresee huge changes, because also we want to finalize this document and share it with everybody, if I may say so. I mean, if you'd like, like I said to Alex, we will share the presentation with the Global Shelter Cluster group, but happy to share also the other. Yeah, thanks for sharing the email, and also share the document, because it's not a secret anymore. So.
Well, actually, until we get until we're actually, it is actually kind of a secret right now, just because it's not secret, but we're trying to get we're getting the peer review, then we're going to put it out. So, because we discussed this earlier about, just sending out the document now, not peer reviewed. So we're going to, the decision we made was to wait till after the peer review before we send it out, because they didn't want multiple versions floating around.
But I mean, we'd want to give kind of a time. It's not like it's going to happen. We don't know when, but soon we will be able to share the document. It's actually existing. Yeah. It's not just something we're talking about, and we will be able to share the most updated version, I would say.
The next 2 or 3 weeks for sure will be the unveil. So excellent. Any questions from the group here? I've got a question for the group. Alex Miller, USAID. Do you foresee this being usable or being able to, incorporate this into projects that you're working on?
Yes, thank you. That's a good question, because right now we are seeing an ever-increasing budget for construction projects, not only shelter, as you guys have said quite a bit, but also infrastructure.
Yeah.
And so with that, we always welcome stronger and more robust systems to make sure that they're built well, and they're built right. We do have the keyword structures in our proposal application guidelines, but again, this type of document for partners to use is very, very, very welcome.
Okay.
We would always want to be incorporated with this as well, to make sure that we can have a consistent and agreed upon forward. But I think this would be great to follow up on afterwards.
Definitely.
In terms of having something more formalized, and also in line with what we, as one of the larger construction donors, want to see, especially in areas where they have continued protracted construction activities.
Yeah.
So yes, the short answer, yes, this is very welcome.
Okay.
And
Fantastic.
that
Fantastic.
I think, looking at how we can start to mold this into maybe more of an idea of humanitarian construction, transitional construction. How can we look at this as a way of, like it said, 6 months? That's really good because we start to look at timelines. We start to look at the idea programmatically what this will do and for how long. So I can go on and on, but I'll let others speak. Thank you.
For sure. And just, Alex, part of this was also inspired. I worked in Haiti, and so much issues with construction in Haiti, and USAID there had their own kind of internal, guidelines and issues. So, every bit of work I did had to be checked by, a third-party engineer, which I thought was fantastic, and I hadn't seen up to that point. So, so there has been USAID projects that have been done, I thought, exceptionally well in terms of, some of the concepts we're putting through here. So I think is especially a good fit for USAID considering, some of the past work I've done with them. So anybody else questions? Okay, if there are no other questions, no problem. I've posted our address. Please do get in touch. Alex, if you'd like to, get in touch, maybe we could have, do a group meeting with us sometimes. We can probably include you if you'd like on the peer review part of the standard, just so you get a kind of a preview of what's going to happen. And if you have any comments from a donor perspective, they could be incorporated into version 3 if you're interested in that.
Please.
Okay. Would you mind dropping your email address for us, Alex? That'd be great, Alex Miller. And if anybody else, who's got an interest in this as well, and feels that they would be able to contribute to the development and kind of molding of the standards, please also drop your email. Let us know who you are, what organization you're from, what's your background in construction, and then we can incorporate you into the mix. Like I said, our timeline is the next 2 or 3 weeks. We're looking at having the peer review finished and the published version rolled out. And if there's nothing else, I'd just like to thank everybody for participation. Chiara, thank you very much as well. And Liz.
Thank you. We're just typing.
Yes.
Thanks to everyone.
So
thanks everyone.
excellent.
And for all the contribution and inputs, and it would be great, as I said, very exciting. Also, USAID can give inputs to the document like we had in the past from ECHO. So it's good to have inputs from all of you and finalize this document. Has been like a kind of a document that we wanted to finalize for some time now. So it's good to see the end of the light at the end of the tunnel.
Great, guys, thank you so much. Maybe I could just prompt people to fill out the feedback survey that I just posted in the chat. And then in terms of emails, etc., it would be great if people could fill out the registration form for this session, which I posted much earlier in the chat, but I'll post it once again. That way we can share your emails with the working group leads, and then they can be in contact about future opportunities.
Excellent.
Great. Alex, it's 5 a.m. I hope you had a very strong coffee. Oh my God.
Oh yes, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for joining us. Thanks, Renee, also for the link, and and thanks Shane, especially because he's been putting a lot of work on that. So appreciate and grateful.
It's a group effort, so and hopefully it's gonna come out to really great things. Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Renee. Thanks everyone. Miguel. Bye.
Bye-bye.